Hi, this is Radical Liberation from St. Louis, Missouri, United States. Oops. And I have with me Mad Mercenary from Australia.
Hello.
So, my mind's already turning to what happens next after this crisis. So the main topic today will be what are the prospects for a recovery as opposed to some kind of lengthy depression as a result of the shutting down of the economy in much of the world, I guess, or good chunks of it, certainly the United States, or shutting down of large portions of the economy, I guess I should say. Before we get into that, I wanted to mention something that's been affecting me in my real life job, which is the negative oil prices. Have you paid any attention to that, Mad Merc?
It's hard not to, but go on about how it's affected you.
Well, I can't go into details, confidentiality and all that, but it did make me learn about why it's even possible, because I at first I was just like, what? How is this even possible? So it looks like this has to do with, and there's a good video on this from one of our colleagues. I should share that in case anyone misses it. This has to do with the futures, I believe, oil futures. That is, contracts for oil that are going to come due shortly. And the problem is that these contracts, the agreement is that they're physical contracts. If you are the one who owns the contract after all the buying and selling is done, when the contract comes due, you need to take physical possession of the oil, which means, and this seems to be the rub right now, you need to have someplace to put the oil. And evidently that's becoming quite a problem, because with a slowdown in the economy, people are using less of it. Demand is less. And so literally the storage facilities are getting full up and they don't have any place to put the oil. And so how could it be negative then? It's negative because you are paying for the privilege of somebody finding a place to put your oil. Did I get that about right, Matt?
Yeah, no, you got that about right. Unless there are some areas that will be able to do this much easier, but unless supply is cut significantly, prices are going to stay this low. Or more likely what will happen is that demand's going to shoot back up, and it's going to go from these crushing lows to exponential highs.
Right. What we won't see, you see negative oil prices and you think, what, they're going to pay me to put gas in my car? I don't think that's going to happen, though that would be really interesting. Could we store gas in your car, please? I don't think that makes much sense. But it could, in the short term, I suppose all this glut of oil could result in, well, it has resulted. I haven't been watching it carefully, but prices at the pump that I've noticed have been pretty low. I don't know if they've been anything like crazy. Like here in the US, $2 a gallon, say, would be a reasonable price. And I've seen $1.70 or something like that. Really crazy, not negative, but just historically crazy would be like $1 or below $1 per gallon. That would be something we haven't seen for a long, long time.
We've had historically crazy.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So just where I live, I drive a fair bit, so within the radius that I live, so usually you'd pay about $1.50 a liter for fuel. It's down to about 75 cents.
Oh, wow. That's more of a drop than I've seen so far, at least here.
So it's crazy here. It's absolutely insane.
It's cut in half from how long ago? Like $1.50 would have been a month ago, 2 months ago?
2 months ago, 3 months ago, something like that. So
Okay.
it's been
Yeah.
at it went to $1, and I thought, holy crap, this is amazing.
Then it
But
kept going.
yeah, and it kept going, it kept going. I was like,
Yeah.
this can't be real. And this, because of our distance, we have a 2 week delay usually on what happens around the world for
Mm-hmm.
oil. So if we're
You're like a
going
lagging.
negative,
You guys are a lagging indicator,
we're
basically.
a lag,
Yeah.
right? So oil could fuel for us could go even lower because now it's
Right.
negative.
Right. This is where we all wish we had a place to store some extra fuel on our property, right?
Well,
Uh,
a lot of us do because we get cyclones and fires and a
oh,
whole bunch of nasty stuff here. So some of us do have jerry cans full of fuel and generators and all that sort of stuff.
I've got a propane tank on my land because of my semi-rural existence here, but I don't think that necessarily helps me in this case. It just got filled today. It just so happens. But anyway, okay, yeah. Oh, any larger implications? I mostly just thought it was interesting to bring up the negative oil future price. I guess is really the right thing to say. Any interesting implications of that strike you?
Um,
The oil being so low and the negative price and all that stuff.
yeah, there's been a lot of talk recently about how the shale industry in the United States is under threat. I see the logic of the.
Sorry, let's explain that real quick because that shale extraction is a more costly method of oil, uh, getting oil out of the ground, right?
It's more cost. So shale oil, the way it's done is costly. It doesn't scale tremendously well for large oil companies. So for the larger oil companies, BP, Total, Exxon, they don't do shale oil because they are looking for those big projects that are they have huge reserves, they don't have to move the equipment all the time, and they already know the technology, basically technology from I don't know, 1960s, 70s. Shale oil is at the bleeding edge of oil technology, so a little bit higher cost, and usually these are reserved for smaller oil companies and natural gas companies because the reserves aren't as large. So, because you have a large amount of companies within that smaller sector and the reserves aren't as large, it's very cutthroat, and prices over the last couple of years have been going down. The reason people are saying it's more expensive is because they're really looking at from the technology sort of side, but the technology side's already been developed. That's not the problem. It
I
was
see.
really the debt used to create that technology. Just like with everything else in the economy, these guys got leveraged up
So
to pay for these
have they
ventures.
been coming out of that already, or are they still paying it off?
Uh, from my knowledge, I think they're still paying it off, but the technology is there. They've already developed the technology to be price and uh, price competitive, not just like with $80 a barrel of oil, but $40 a barrel of oil, which is competitive with Saudi Arabia. So the technology was there and developed to the point where yes, they can be competitive. The problem is that they had this debt to make it.
Um,
As far as I can tell, there may be another factor here that I'm not considering, but
right.
that's as far as I can tell what the problem is.
Yeah. Yeah, because I thought I'd heard people saying, "Oh, they're just going to have to stop the shale oil process because they just can't afford to do it." Um, I don't know. That sounds a little unlikely. I mean, paying off
If
that
worst came
debt
to
needs to
worst,
be done, right?
yeah, if worst came to worst, I would say that the government would bail them out.
Yeah. Well, there's that. Right?
And Trump's been talking about that. He said
Yeah.
I think he tweeted out something about not allowing the oil and steel industry. I think it was to go bankrupt. He said
Mhm.
he'll bail them out. So
Okay, so let's turn to our topic for the day. In fact, changed my mind what I want to have up first. Let me just grab the cool image you made. So,
But sorry, just one last thing on oil.
yeah.
I don't. These prices won't come back anytime during our lifetimes. So if you want to get some spare capacity on your property, I'd say do it now, because
Mhm.
when these things reverse and go back up, they're going to come back up with a vengeance.
Yeah, that's it. We'll have to see. In many ways, it'd be great for energy prices to be low as we think about a recovery, right? That certainly wouldn't hurt if energy prices stayed a little bit lower. That would be that'd be a facilitator of recovery, in my view. If they were, low for good reason, namely,
Right.
there's just a lot of supply backed up in the whole system. Here, let me do something a little bit different, real quick. Before we switch to our next topic, I'm going to go through the chat, and because there was some things specific to this, and then we'll focus on our main topic. Let's see. That's not about. Is this the end of the petrodollar? Says Ajit. What does the petrodollar mean? I don't think I really understand precisely what we mean when we say the petrodollar. Do we mean people buying oil with US dollars?
No, it's
Oh.
how do I it's probably a topic all to itself and probably a stream all to itself. So let's put that on the back burner, because I want to do that topic justice, and I don't just want to
Okay.
do a flippant explanation of it. So
Okay.
let's keep it on the back burner.
Let's remember the petrodollar. That actually sounds interesting because
Oh, it is.
speaking from a foreign policy perspective, I'm not the only one. I think academic agent as well. I'm not the only one who thinks that certain people get ready to bomb you if you deviate from how they want you to function in regards to like using the U.S. dollar and stuff like that. Okay, so let's see. Anything else? I'm going to skip some that are more directed to our main topic. Put the oil in the sea. I heard the fish and seabirds love it. That's funny.
Well, at least they won't mix.
Okay. Guy said he got a gallon for $1.10. Wow. I'm assuming with the US dollar sign there, he's talking about the US. That would be significantly lower than I've seen. I maybe haven't gotten gas for a week, but $1.10 is, wow. It's getting near crazy low. And he says, I have to put 99 octane in my car, so it's great for me at the moment. That's a different grade of gas or something? I don't know what that means. Okay. This is where AA quotes the film There Will Be Blood, and the guy saying, I drink your milkshake, and he steals the oil. Yeah. Hector says, great to see you live. Usually I'm already asleep when you guys start. Good to have you, sir.
Always good to have you, mate.
I use 99 octane Shell V-Power. It's the cheapest I've seen for years. It now costs the equivalent of $5.90 a gallon. So I don't know what the normal price would be. This is what is this? This is like the most premium version of gas or something?
It's high performance.
High performance. Okay.
It's that's cheap.
So you have an idea of what it would be normally?
Not in gallons, but in liters. That's it's quite expensive fuel usually. So,
well, okay. You just told us as a level set. You said regular gas would be like $1.50 a liter. So what would this premium stuff be normally?
Oh, when was the last time I bought it? It really depends on your area, because in Western Australia they're very isolated, so it's much higher for them. But on the East Coast, like I would have to say $3 a liter, $3.20.
Mm-hmm. So something like double the price
Yeah.
of the regular gas most of us would buy. Clossington says, hi, Clossington. Dumping oil into the ocean creates environmental management jobs and stimulates GDP. Which makes me think of like nuke the whales, right?
Nuke the whale. Dig a hole, dig a hole.
That's right. Okay, and Lauren says 99 is the highest grade you can buy at the pump in the UK. Okay, anyway, let's move on then to talk about prospects for recovery. I was ready to talk all optimistically, but I'm not sure that that's where we're going to end up. But let's not worry about that yet. First, let's set some historical backdrop, because what we want to think about here is, we don't need to belabor what happened in the United States in 1929, in the early 30s. I think it's a well-known story. I suspect outside of the U.S., it's a well-known story, right? This is the New Deal. The aspects of that, without going into great details, just the aspects of that primer for people who are new to this stuff that you might not have heard, is that Herbert Hoover post hoc was painted as having been a big laissez-faire guy, and he didn't do what needed to be done. FDR came along and saved us because he started all these programs and basically did Keynesian type stuff, which is what was needed. The reality is that Herbert Hoover did the New Deal, and FDR's New Deal was actually called the Second New Deal. It's later been just remembered as the New Deal, but it was actually the Second New Deal because Hoover had done it first. Hoover had talked people into keeping wages at current levels and not letting them drop. Kind of put the muscle on big businesses to not let their wages drop, and in various ways prevented the economy from readjusting to the new situation. So that's 1930, mostly well-known story, except for the Herbert Hoover part, where Rothbard personally is really the one to get credit, I think, for revising our view of Hoover's role, which had kind of been buried with a lot of, pro-FDR stuff, I guess. Here's a story that may not be so well known. I suspect it isn't. I certainly didn't know about it till I started hanging around Austrian school folks. And that's the story of the 1920-21 downturn. So let me start with just to get a graph up on the screen to give you an idea here. Okay, unemployment. There we go. Okay, so certainly, you look over on the right and you see the Great Depression. It's just the unemployment rates are just phenomenal, right? Getting up to 25% at their worst. But go back about 10 years before the start of all that and look at 1920, 21 there. You see an unemployment rate getting up to 12%. Now, by the way, I've been hearing absolute numbers, so many millions of people applying for unemployment. I should have looked this up. Have you seen anything, Mad Merc, about unemployment rates anywhere right now? Like percentages?
I heard the number 8.5% gets run around, but I do not know if that's true or not. I would want to look that up before I said this is a definitive percentage. So
I just realized I'd only heard absolute numbers and hadn't seen a percent. So just to try to compare to the situation back in the 20s and 30s. Anyway, so we'll see. I'm concerned that we could certainly reach 1920, 21 levels in the United States, for example, where so much has been shut down and all kinds of people are applying for unemployment, millions of people all the time and all this stuff. But having said that, an unemployment rate of nearly 12% is no joke. That's a big unemployment rate. And you'll notice, in fact, it's hard to see the exact years here, but I believe that high of the 12% unemployment is greater than like the first year of after 1929. You can kind of see.
So after
1930 gets up to about 8%.
8%, 8.5. 8.4%, somewhere around there.
Yeah, somewhere around there, right. So in other words, the beginning of the 1920-21 downturn in the United States was actually worse, at least at first. If you just look at like the first 12 months, it was worse unemployment, more dramatic downturn in a number of ways. But then watch what happens after that. You see the unemployment drop in the year following to about 6%. And then it goes down to pretty much really low unemployment, around 2%, which is fine. Lumberg claims around 5% is structural unemployment, I guess, meaning just what you would expect as people shift jobs and
natural.
so forth.
And you need unemployment in the system for the system to be efficient.
Right, which we saw in Academic Agent's Modern Monetary Theory video, right? He just was emphasizing that constant full employment would actually be a sort of a nightmare scenario, like no one can move their job, nothing can change, lest someone be considered unemployed for a microsecond, and mess up our stats, right? So some sort of dystopian scenario, full employment dystopia. Anyway, so in short, what you see here is a really bad 12 to 18 months in 1920-21, a truly bad crash, but hardly anyone remembers it. Why? Because it isn't the beginning of 10, 15, whatever years of depression, as you see on the right there, with the 1929 crash and subsequent on a horrible unemployment and so many other things bad throughout the 30s. So we know the story of the 30s. We know that FDR saved us. We look at the stats, we can see actually he didn't. The whole 30s was just a big mess, just lost years, economically speaking. So what happened in 1920-21? Well, what happened to some degree was Warren Harding, right? I shared this quote on Twitter. I should pull it up. He says, "We must proceed with the full realization that no statute enacted by man can repeal the inexorable laws of nature." I thought that was a great quote. He came at this with a very different perspective, which is that you would have to let the economy unwind and readjust. And it's interesting. Not only was his approach, don't get in the way of that, don't get in the way of the economy readjusting. His approach was to actually get out of the way. So take a look at this. I did not fully realize how dramatic he was in his approach. And as Mad Merc was commenting earlier, you just can't imagine this now. Like there'd be riots in the streets, maybe. I don't know. Maybe if somebody could sell it, I don't know.
You would certainly lose your seat in whatever representative democracy system you're in.
Yeah, right. You see the spending had gotten quite high just prior to the downturn. Maybe that had something to do with the downturn. But anyway, let's leave that aside for a moment. You see the spending got quite high, up to 25% of GDP prior to this crash. And then the crash happens, and he cut spending really dramatically. Now, let's see. Oh, I think I put it. Oh, here we go. I've got it right here from an article by Robert Murphy on this incident. From fiscal year 1919 to 1920, federal spending was slashed from 18.5 billion to 6 billion. So rounding that or trimming those numbers off, 18 to 6, a 65% reduction in 1 year. I mean, just imagine the United States federal government doing a 65% reduction in spending in 1 year. Like there'd be, it'd be like the lady screaming at the sky when Trump becomes president, right? It'd be like that times 10 million, right? And then he goes on to say the budget was pushed down the next 2 years as well, to a low of 3.3 billion in fiscal year 1922. So within a couple years, it went from 18 billion to 3 billion. that is just amazing. And you see a bit of that story here. In fact, I love it that I found this graph because there's a little circle around the area that we're interested in. And you can see that the spending drops precipitously from 25% of GDP down to like 5%, right? And then it stays there until we get, Hoover and FDR starting to pump it up again. So it actually stays there through the roaring 20s, right? Which is correctly remembered as an economically pretty successful time in the United States. So this is the story I wanted to make sure that we got to hear, that as Bob Murphy put it in his article, it's almost like a laboratory experiment. We got to see a downturn in 1920 and a crash in 1920 and a crash in 1929, 1930. And we got to see two almost polar opposite approaches to how to handle those crashes. And the results were pretty polar opposite as well, namely that the 1920-21 downturn was pretty short-lived. Within 18 months to 2 years, the pain was kind of getting over, unemployment was going back down. Businesses had, shut and reopened, and, some businesses had shut down, some businesses reopened. 18 to 24 months can be a pretty long time. Things can move pretty fast in the economy if they're allowed to. And so basically it was all over. Meanwhile, the 30s just ground on. And as my friend Robert Higgs pointed out, the Depression didn't end when the World War II started, which a lot of conservatives like to say even. That would be ridiculous. That'd just be a variation on Keynesian spending. It's just spending on war, right? If you do your statistical work properly, you can see that the Depression really went on until 1946. So 1929 to 46, like 17 years. I mean, what a nightmare. No wonder my grandparents had like a closet full of soap and, things like that. Like they were prepared for the apocalypse because they'd kind of been through one, So that's the United States story. But right before the show, and this kind of is spontaneous, so we're not fully prepared for this. Mad Mercenary told me a story from Australia that really blew my mind. So let me just get a picture up here, and then tell us who this guy is, and tell us the Australian story.
Right. So this is our 10th Prime Minister, Joseph Lyons. He's a really interesting character. He used to be part of the Labor Party, which is our left-wing party.
Right.
The Labor Party. He was a economics guy. He was treasurer in Tasmania. He was under this. Let me just get this right. He was under the Scullin government. Hold on. Lyons government. Hold on. Blah blah blah. New plan. Keynesian economics in Australia. Yes, Scullin government. He was under the Scullin government. Labor had the Premier's plan after the Great Depression. So Great 1929, 1930, Great Depression hits. Australia is absolutely destroyed. We had in 1932, we had 35% unemployment. Way bigger.
So it was not 1929 for Australia, or was it? Did Australia crash?
It was.
Right?
But just like in the United States, the crash and the depression were two different things.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So Australian economy crashed, which then subsequently we had the depression, and we had at our height we had 32% unemployment in 1932. Which is significant. 1 in 3 Australians is out of work. What happened is that the Labor government proposed the Premier's plan. And in the Premier's plan, they decided to cut interest rates. They decided to stopped repaying their debt to to their debtors, mostly in England. They were paying their loans back to. And generally, there was two wings of the party at that point, and Lyons, who was a Labour politician at that point, he resigned from the party with other right-leaning Labour ministers out of disgust over this plan.
Mm.
He then formed and joined with the Country Party, I think they were called at that time. Yes. And he formed the United Australia Party, UAP. And in 1930, he won the election based on austerity. He ran on an austerity platform, just cutting government budget, cutting everything, and he won. The greatest Australian victory in our history since our democracy has been set up.
Just imagine people voting for, what we now call austerity. Right. It's almost hard to imagine at this point.
Yeah, he won the greatest Australian victory on a policy that everyone today would say is impossible to run on. Mm-hmm. And he won 3 times. He doesn't just won once. He won 3 times. Anyway, he gets into office. What does he do? We achieve between 1929 and 1940 a 16.6 real gross domestic product growth.
Wait.
At the same time,
you mean average per year? What do you mean 16%?
Yep.
Oh wow! So this is like China during the 80s or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
This is at the same time the United States was getting 1.6%.
Right. So this is like the Australian economic miracle. This is I'm thinking of parallels.
But no one remembers it.
Post World War II West Germany type of story, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Wow.
So in 1932 we had 32% unemployment.
Mm-hmm.
And unemployment fell by 1936 to single digits.
Mm-hmm.
Just 4 years later, his first years in office. And at the same time, the United States' unemployment was 15.5% in 1936.
Right. Yeah. As we saw, just terrible through that whole period.
Right.
So, okay. So you're giving us the results, but you're not telling us exactly, like, what did he do?
Okay. So he ran on the policy of fiscal conservatism, which was and his big thing was balance the budget. Because if you remember what I said beforehand, the Australian government and state governments had borrowed a lot of money from their creditors in England, and they were going to default on it because they simply had no way of paying it back. And his big thing was, we got to stop that. We have to run stimulus. We have to get our budgets balanced. You can't run on deficit spending, and you can't run on just debt for the nation because too many people rely on it. And so when he got into office, he had a deficit spend of about $5.5 million from the previous Labour government. Now remembering this 5.5 in $1930, so whatever the conversion rate is. And he left the office with surplus.
Right. And so putting aside deficit versus surplus, just overall spending went down under him, right?
Yes. And he introduced tax cuts in 1934.
Oh.
He introduced.
So he was keeping it balanced. He was bringing down spending and also bringing down the take. He was taking less and also bringing down the spending and keeping it balanced. So it was both going down. Both sides of the ledger were going down at the same time.
Exactly. So Lyons' first budget in 1932 restricted maternity allowance, cut pensions, cut public service wages, In his second budget, he revised the wage cut and offered tax cuts as well.
Hmm.
And in 1934, he cut the tax again.
Wow.
So he cut it 2 or 3 times within that period.
Right. So I don't want to stop you from sharing more awesome details because this is amazing. But just to be clear, this is very parallel, as I understand it, to Warren Harding's approach. Warren Harding's
Yes.
approach was, how do we help with this situation? How do we, the government, help? Take less away from the economy so the economy has resources to recover. Right. And that's exactly what he was doing as well.
Yeah, he again, this is a man who resigned over principle from the 3% interest, dropping interest rates to 3%, which today we would say, wow, that's actually pretty good considering we're at 0 and negative interest rates.
Right.
This is a man who said, no, stuff that. You're going to do that. I'm leaving your party. So this is a man who had some principle and knew and backbone behind him, and still won the elections and still got Australia on her feet again.
More than on her feet, it sounds like. So, I mean, coming out of the 30s, based on what you're saying, not only was it like getting back to normal after the horrible 32% unemployment and all that, it sounds like with those levels of growth, it must have been more than getting back to normal, right?
Right. So Australia beforehand, primarily, most people were employed in agriculture. Afterwards, most people were employed by manufacturing.
Oh, wow. So you're saying he basically presided or at least set the stage for kind of an industrial revolution, or I guess you could say.
Yeah, kind of.
Something like that. Or at least, you know, I think of the Industrial Revolution because of a shift out of agriculture, you know, large portions of the population not being farmers anymore. I don't know what you guys shifted to from agriculture, but it sounds like a similarly dramatic shift out of agriculture, right?
Yeah. So
wow,
this is a, you want to see a Chad prime minister? He's right there.
So Australia went from, and I don't know enough about New Zealand to even say what I'm going to say, but Australia went from like a bunch of sheep herders in New Zealand or something like that, whatever the Australian equivalent to that was, to being like a player economically, right? By the time this guy was done.
Well, our agriculture industry was very important at the time. We were still producing wool and wheat in substantial numbers. So it's not like we had turned into a non-player.
Yeah,
well, excuse me. It's not like we were a non-player, but we had a semi-decent industrial base to back that up now, and a surplus.
Right. Coming
and
out
this
of the
guy, and not only did he do all this, but in his foreign policy, he saw the tide of war coming before most people did and started to rearm Australia early.
Oh, no kidding.
So,
wow,
this guy was he was on his ball. He knew what he was doing.
And because of this, Joseph Lyons is a massive hero in Australia that everybody remembers fondly, right?
No.
Now, is it okay? But it couldn't be like what happened with 1920-21. All we get taught, and I'm sure you've heard the same thing even from Australia, is the Roaring '20s, and that's sort of vague. They never even mention that there was a horrible downturn in 1920 that Warren Harding recovered from by cutting government spending and otherwise leaving everything alone. Like you just don't know that unless you hang around Austrian school economists, right? Well, they couldn't have buried Joseph Lyons quite that way in Australia. How do they spin this amazing story?
They don't mention it.
Oh, really? So it is buried to some degree.
They don't. So it's not that it's buried. It's just don't mention it. Don't mention it. He doesn't exist. You know, let's talk about the great Scullin government and how they brought growth for 4 years and that crap. So,
wow, that's amazing that they could ignore something like this, because it sounds like it was not just a downturn and amazing downturn, amazing recovery. but it was a shift in terms of Australia economically, right? I mean, Australia was a different economic kind of country by the time this guy was done with them.
Yeah, he did do a couple things that I disagree with. For example,
Mm-hmm.
he did introduce one tax that I am incredibly annoyed about, which is the income tax.
Oh, mm-hmm.
But he did it at a very low rate. But as we know with governments, as soon
Yeah.
as you grant them the power to do something, slowly over time that expands. And now, let's just say me and the government and income tax aren't exactly friends.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, well, anyway, any other key points to emphasize about Joseph Lyons?
Yeah, idle time has a really good point here.
Hmm.
Economic history began with FDR in his econ class, and that's how a lot of people are taught.
Right. Right. So these other cases that would make people like think, right? Even the layman, given the typical story of FDR and all that stuff, if they were told the story of 1920 to 21, or in Australia, if you were told the story of Joseph Lyons and how he handled this massive downturn and got Australia out of it and better than out of it, even regular folks would be like, well, wait a second.
Yeah,
Not sure I can buy the standard Keynesian tale, after I've learned about these historical stories. So the strategy, I'm amazed, but in both Australia and the US, the strategy is just don't talk about it.
yeah.
That solves that inconvenient historical episode for our narrative. Just hush it up. Wow. Amazing.
It's if we don't talk about it and we don't see it, it's not there.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's briefly talk.
It's really a child's view of the world, by the way. If I
Yeah,
close my eyes, it can't harm me.
right.
It's a very childlike view of the world.
It can't harm my narrative.
Yeah.
Right. And we see that newspaper media does this all the time. Corporate press does this all the time now. Stories that don't fit the narrative get buried. Or the most fun is it looks like it's going to fit the narrative, and then more facts come out and it doesn't. And suddenly the thing they were starting to really talk about, they just stop talking about it. That's the creepiest part, like, oh, never mind that thing we brought up yesterday. We're just not even going to mention it today.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's briefly talk a little bit about what this means for 2020's crash, and then go to the chat. Lots of great comments, and they love this story of Joseph Lyons, and I did too. So yeah, one of the things you commented on, I totally agree. It feels like we're in a different time, and maybe that's too pessimistic, and we just don't have the right people to lead in the right way on this stuff. But right now, it just feels like, well, Ron Paul just couldn't get anywhere in the United States in terms of getting anywhere near the presidency, right? Ron Paul is the sort of person who would do something like Joseph Lyons or Warren Harding did, right? But instead, you get someone like Trump, who's, I'm going to spend bigger and better than anybody else, right? I mean, and so, what are the prospects for recovery? Well, I don't know. It's on the one hand, I have trouble seeing governments across the West deciding that the way to respond, once things start going back to normal, the thing to do is to just drastically cut government spending by 2/3 or something. Like, I don't think there's going to be a single government that anyone's even going to raise that as a possible approach, right? So the Joseph Lyons, Warren Harding approach is not even going to be on the table as an option from that perspective. On the other hand,
impossible.
Yeah. On the other hand, I don't know. Do you think I don't know that there'll be all this like propping up of wages and stuff. I don't know. Maybe there will be minimum wage laws or something. I don't know.
Perhaps more government welfare, to be quite frank.
Well, that's true.
The what are they called now? Trump checks.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, I have a big family, so I got stimulated in a major way from that.
So maybe that's how they do it. Instead of creating value, they just print money and give it to people.
Right. And so what would be the consequence of this? I mean, what we want to see, what I would love to see is look for signs of the possibility of a Joseph Lyons, Warren Harding approach, right? That kind of recovery. And what that would mean is that the economy would adjust quickly. That means businesses that need to close would close, but new businesses would open up. People would leave jobs that they shouldn't be in anymore and shift to jobs that they should be in. That kind of stuff, right? That's what we would need to really come out of this fast and not have this be the beginning of a long, sad story.
Right, and what we're not saying is that there won't be unemployment. Austrian economics says that the crash is necessary
Right.
for the realignment and readjustment of the economy. So yes, we are saying we need to have a crash. So it's very clear to everyone.
Right.
What we're saying is that the crash is inevitable, but we can make it shorter
Right.
by allowing the market to find the most efficient means of distributing scarce resources, including jobs.
Right. Or we could sputter along just for years with things
Yes.
being, not quite what they are now, where like people aren't allowed to go to work, right? But not exactly like it was before, right? With a lot of people displaced from their jobs, small businesses that just fail and are replaced with nothing.
Right.
Right. That kind of thing.
The initial crash could be worse than the government intervention crash, as we saw with 1920 and 1930. But you're going to be healthier for it.
Right.
Yeah, it's like an overweight person who goes to the gym. Yeah, it's going to hurt at first, but if you keep at it, you're going to be healthy.
Right. So what we saw in both cases, I think, was a lot of pain for a smaller amount of time with Joseph Lyons in Australia, Warren Harding in the United States. Whereas with FDR, say, Hoover and FDR, it just went on and on and on for 17 years of misery and massive unemployment. And so that's what we'd love to avoid. And I wish we could. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I just was going to say, I wish we could get the Joseph Lyon, Warren Harding. I don't know what other examples there are, but I wish we could get this option on the table, at least so that people would consider it as an option. And right now it just seems like I wouldn't even know how to get anyone to seriously consider it.
I actually have a theory about this. I think World War II is the reason we can't do it. So after World War II, there was a big understanding within governments that, hey, we ran the economy. 50% of the economy was government spending during the war for the United States, and this was the biggest boom in our history, quote unquote, as the Keynesian economists would say. And so this idea that the government can run the economy and coordinate resources, if it worked during the war, why can't it work during peacetime? Mm-hmm. And this kind of idea has just lingered on and on and on throughout the years. It's morphed into different sort of forms. So, we just need a minimum wage. We just need the government to provide health care. We just, it's these different sort of areas, but the idea is the same, that the government can distribute scarce resources, and it's because we were able to do it during the war.
Right.
What we really need to look at is how efficient was that?
This is what Lord Keynes, too, constantly says to Academic Agent in their ongoing debates, right? He says, it worked. Central planning worked during the war. See? And this is like boomer truth regime thing. Okay, so go ahead.
What I think we need to do is ask I don't know if I'm the guy to do it, or you're the guy to do it, or maybe there's someone in the chat who's the person to do it. But we should really have a look and see, was the central planning the most efficient way to direct resources during a war, or is there an alternate way in the private system during the war that directed resources more efficiently.
Hmm.
I don't know if it's ever been done in human history where the
Yeah.
private sector has directed resources during a war, but it would be an interesting experiment to see which is more efficient. And if the private sector is more efficient, then this just blows the Keynesian argument out of the water and saying,
Right.
well,
Right.
look at the war, look at the war, look at the war.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Wartime price controls, wartime planning. It's gotten a pass somehow. Okay, so let's go to the chat. We got a lot of good stuff, and it's going to take a while to get through it. Rogers says, way back at the beginning of the stream, who would have thunk that the New Deal would be locking most people in their homes? They don't even need them to work via make work schemes. We just lock everybody in their house and send them checks. That's the New Deal, at least in my country. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, Mad Merc. I didn't ask you what's happening in Australia. Is everybody sitting at home? Is the economy 90% shut down or whatever?
Uh, how do I put this? We're all defaulting on our debt.
Hmm.
So Australia has the highest per household debt in the world, and boy, people aren't able to work, so a lot of people are defaulting on that debt, and people are starting to really get tired of having to sit at home. I think another 2 weeks of this, and people might just ignore the curfew laws. And my government is becoming more authoritarian and is wanting Australians to download this tracking app for the Australian government to see where
Hmm.
people are and
Right.
if the patterns of people and how people are interacting with the quarantine. And there's speculation to say if not enough people voluntarily download it, it will become
Hmm.
mandatory.
Right. Your operating
So
system just forces it on you. Right.
yeah, so my government might just start tracking us.
Right. Okay, so I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on this, but let me share the question, a couple responses from them, and then let's get one from you. Any recommendation what we could do with our savings to beat the incoming inflation, like mutual funds, etc.? Lauren says buy gold. Again, Lauren says when you get your paycheck, pay your bills, use 100% of the rest to buy bullion or whatever metal has the lowest tax rate in your area. Clossington says, buy my new crypto, meth coin. It's backed by gold, still more stable than fiat.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, any thought on ways people can protect themselves, assuming that they actually have some money to put in something to protect?
If you have money, first off, pay off your debt.
Hmm.
So you don't what's the phrase? A lender nor what
Borrower
is it?
B, yeah.
A borrower
Neither
be,
a
yeah.
lender nor a borrower B, yeah.
That's it. Pay off your debt. Next, make sure you are secure, you have a place to sleep and all that sort of stuff. Yeah. Now, if we're talking about investment, gold to silver ratio at the moment is something like 108 to 1. And the world average is usually 15 to 1. So silver at the moment is really undervalued.
Interesting.
Now, silver is a little bit harder to store than gold. I mean, you got to wear a glove for silver, really. But, if you want to talk about value for your money, silver is not a bad option. Gold, obviously, everyone knows about gold. I don't have to explain
Right.
why. What else? Gold stocks. Gold stocks should be going up with the increased sales in gold and price of gold going up. Silver
Right.
stocks, really mineral like mining companies, that sort of stuff. Because demand for those sorts of raw resources is going to go up really. Because if you think about it, if your government's going to be doing infrastructure programs and all that sort of stuff and going to be buying from these companies, then the artificially created demand for these resources will mean that the stocks of these companies are going to go up.
Right.
So, do we agree with it that they should be doing the infrastructure plans? No. Is there a way you can profit from it? Yeah.
Right. Okay, I just thought this was funny. Are trad wives counted as unemployed, or are we talking about people on welfare? Unfortunately, the government plays all kinds of games. You might think that unemployed refers to people who are not employed. Oh, no, 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 no. No, no, no,
Silly
no.
you.
That would be so simple and easy. No, no, no. The unemployed are people who were looking for a job recently within the last 90 days, and asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. They have all kinds of ways, because normally they want to understate the unemployment numbers. They want to make themselves look good, so they play lots of games to make the unemployment look smaller than it is.
That's very generous to have 90 days. Ours is only 4 weeks.
Okay, yeah, that might be right. I haven't seen the latest. I just know that they keep playing with it and keep the tendency over time is for the definition of unemployment to deflate, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So
to get tighter.
So to explain this really quickly, if I have a job and I lose my job, I'm unemployed. If I don't search for a job for 4 weeks, I am off the unemployment statistic. If I continue to look for a job past 4 weeks, I'm still on the unemployment statistic. If I didn't have a job to begin with and didn't enter the labor market to begin with, I am not on the unemployment statistic. If I just accept welfare and I don't do anything but sit on the couch and eat buckets of chips, I am not on the unemployment statistic. So,
right,
yeah, it's very narrow.
Games are played.
Very narrow.
This is interesting. Oh, go ahead.
No, go. Sorry, I finished my point. I was just going to add a little joke.
Okay, Dark Eagle. In Austria, we're at 12.2% unemployment by now. Yikes. So that's actually up to that 1921 level that we were looking at. Let's see.
Oh, one more thing about stocks and shares I just thought of. If we're going to crash further, which I think we're all thinking that we will, why don't you just short something that you think is going to fall off the cliff?
Yeah, that's an interesting thought. Right.
Tesla. All these tech companies that have not run a profit in 10 years.
Right.
I mean, do you think people want to still invest in them?
Luxury goods.
Yeah, exactly.
Sell luxury goods. Yeah. It's a good idea. Lawrence says,
just short them and make money.
Right. Lawrence says, if you have less people employed, you have less tax revenue. So it makes sense that you would cut government spending. Note, it is always is higher than it was before the spike, regardless of whether it was cut after or they spent more after the crash.
Short the Guardian.
He's saying, I'm sorry. So what he's saying here is that a couple of people commented on this. When I had that government spending thing up, that after the whole thing was over, the government spending, after the whole 30s, 40s thing was over, the government spending did not drop back down to like Warren Harding levels ever again, right? And this is something Robert Higgs talked about as the ratchet effect. It goes up, maybe comes back some, but it doesn't go back to where it was before. It's ratcheted up with each crisis. So this crisis will ratchet. This crisis of 2020 is going to ratchet certain things up if we follow. If we don't have a Ron Paul revolution or something, it's going to ratchet a bunch of stuff up, spying on us, government spending, etc. And those things will not totally go back to where they were before the crisis. They might
and this is
come down a bit, but they won't go back to where they were.
This is the same sort of thing with Lyons, right? So, as I said, he introduced the income tax here, which, for all his good, now because of that ratchet effect, the government can take 45% of a high-income family's pay.
Okay, Lumberg, there's a correction here. Interesting to note that even after WW1 is what he meant to say. After World War I, the new normal for government spending almost doubled. Doubled again during the Great Depression. Doubled again after World War II. I think he got World War I, World War II mixed up.
Yeah.
Right. When it ratchets up, it's no joke. It's not like 0.5% higher, right? After the crisis is all over, it's more. It's insignificant. Lawrence comments, Mad Merc sounds extra Australian today.
Oh, do I?
Must be who you were hanging out with lately or something.
Yeah.
Okay, legalized prostitution, unemployment goes down. I'm a genius, says Craig.
Apart from the societal aspects.
Yeah, right. The moral aspects. Yeah. Lawrence, Australian 1930s people should be allowed to vote. Right. Basically, whoever voted for Joseph Lyons, could we get them voting again?
Yeah, I mean, I wish we could
Yeah.
have those people back.
Lawrence also says Chad Australia versus Virgin USA.
During
yeah,
the 1930s.
right.
I think 1920s is a little bit different.
Yeah, but that 30s contrast is really remarkable. Let's see, idle time. It's amazing that this is never mentioned in econ classes. I don't know if he's talking about either of these episodes, but I would say
both. Yeah,
you would think both of these episodes would be something that if people were really trying to understand how things work as opposed to selling a narrative, both of these stories would be something really worth highlighting and saying, well, you all know about the Great Depression, but let me tell you two stories you haven't heard, right? I mean,
yeah,
exactly. If I was a teacher, I would do that. But anyway, Lawrence says Keynesians destroyed.
Well, here's the thing, actually, about the Australian story. There was I think it was New South Wales and Victorian governments adopted Keynesian economic policies. And this was the reason the big split happened within the Labor Party at that point. Lyons.
I'm sorry, say that again. Who adopted Keynesian
I think
policies?
the Victorian and New South Wales state governments.
Oh, state governments, got it.
And there was a big debate within the Labor Party at that point. Do we go down a semi-fiscally conservative path, or do we embrace full Keynesian? Right. And when they went there, and Lyons said stuff to both of them, we need to go full conservative route for this one.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the Labor Party, to their credit, went a semi-Keynesian, semi-fiscally conservative route, Lyons just went, stuff that, I'm out of here. We're going full conservative or nothing. And he formed the United Australia Party, and the rest is history.
It's amazing. Well, except a history no one remembers.
Yeah, exactly.
No one wants to talk about. Okay, Benjamin Rood. Hi, guys. In New Zealand, the banks have restricted the amount of cash you can take out to $200 a day.
Holy shit.
There was a significant mini run on the banks. Yeah, there's a significant mini run on the banks before lockdown, people taking $100,000 or more out in cash. That's interesting.
I haven't heard about that.
I hadn't heard about that globally. Maybe that was just in New Zealand. You know, in the United States, it's been toilet paper. I guess in New Zealand, they had much more sense and they tried to grab their cash. But anyway, that's fascinating because we've talked about the war on cash. And there have been some restrictions, getting rid of larger denominations like $5,000, $1,000 bills, things like that. Restrictions on how much you can take out at once. I know that this is a crisis and everything. This is a crisis and everything, but what a precedent. $200. I mean, what if you want to buy an old used car with cash from somebody? $200 probably ain't going to do it. You know, I mean, that's crazy. That's hard to function.
Benjamin Rood, can you send me through Twitter or the Discord or wherever you want to contact me the link to an article about that from a reputable source? That's really, because I haven't heard a peep about that. Which is interesting.
That's fascinating. Thank you, sir. Okay. I guess this is speaking of Joseph Lyons. He was an economic shit poster based Australian. Let's see. Further comment from Benjamin on the New Zealand situation. Cash supply is very low. Things are a lot more shaky than the government is letting on. Okay. Oh, this is a great comment about Joseph Lyons from Craig. I love this. What kind of leftist is this?
I think I think what he was is the traditional worker right leftist rather than economic leftist.
Right. He wasn't a socialist.
No, he wasn't a socialist.
Right.
He understood that you have to run a fiscally conservative policy, but I think his heart really lied with the average working guy, which is why he went for the Labour Party. because
right.
they set themselves up as for the average worker at that
And
point.
of course, the reality, and it's Marxism and various things have interfered with this. The reality is that the free market economists are the great champions of the regular guy, and the great
Exactly.
opponents of the ones with political privilege, right? The ones who are gaming the system, and screwing the regular folks who aren't politically connected. So if life were just, the Workers' Party it'd be like the ANCAP Workers' Party or something, right? It would be libertarians and workers together fighting against the big money interests.
Well, think about the name that
that
he
would be
chose.
great.
Think about the name of his party, the United Australian Party.
Hmm.
That just speaks to patriotism right there. That just speaks to
Right.
a nation together.
Right, and he wasn't right. He wasn't the kind of leftist we've gotten used to these days who hate their country. Right. He wanted Australia to do well. He wanted the people of Australia to do well, and he really made a significant contribution to that. Okay. Lauren said, "Why didn't he win the fourth time?" He actually died in office during his third term.
He died of a heart attack in office.
Right. Yeah. So he stuck it out to the end. Okay, let's see.
Right before World War II began.
Oh, okay. So he helped prepare for World War II, but wasn't actually a wartime president. Okay. Lumberg says gold is record high right now, but it's a hedge position at this point.
I think gold is going to probably go higher, and yeah, it is hedging against inflation, and it's hedging against the instability of the economy.
It's a perfectly reasonable thing to do, though, right?
Yes, absolutely reasonable. Here's the thing. I am very concerned at this point that we might, because of modern monetary theory and everything, the extreme lengths that central banks around the world are going to, I am very concerned at this point that gold and silver might be confiscated a year or two down the line, just like FDR did. I would be very concerned about that. So
that's interesting. Yeah.
Good idea to have precious metals.
Bury them.
Just have a place that you can store them safely, and I mean safely.
I'm skipping a lot of love for Joseph Lyons, which is great, but I had to highlight this one. Lauren says, "I wouldn't even helicopter this guy." That's great.
Wouldn't even.
Okay. Can you ask MM later? Mad Merc, if Australian cash reserves are very low at the moment, and New Zealand, the banks have, he just mentioned that. The withdrawals, there was a run on the banks before lockdown. Yeah, cash reserves, but you haven't been hearing about runs on the Australian banks or anything like that, right?
No, nothing about runs on the Australian banks. What I have been heard, as I said, cash ban regulations have been starting to be introduced into Australia, but I haven't heard anything else about that. I think the coronavirus has really taken the either attention away or the priorities towards coronavirus, so that I haven't heard any movement on that front.
Okay. I got to do a little more love for Joseph Lyons. Craig says Lyons should be on the Australian dollar. I'm assuming he's not on any coinage, right?
As far as I know, he's not.
Yeah. We had highlighted that from Idle Time about history beginning with FDR, economic history. So true.
Monash is on our $100 bill, and he was probably one of the first generals in history to adopt modern warfare, like combined arms warfare. And he was described as one of the most effective general in World War I. So,
wow,
by Haig. So
okay. Benjamin Rood says if a historical figure isn't useful to a progressive agenda, they need to be scrubbed out. It's damn Nazi tier stuff. Yeah, or I would say Orwellian, right?
Yeah.
Things that are inconvenient to them, they just drop down the memory hole. Let's see. Yeah. And then we get into the boomer tier stuff, which, I have to say, academic agents' emphasis on the boomer truth regime and all that. Sorry, I meant to say boomer truth. Boomer truth regime, it does fit very well into the discussion we're having today. There are certain things that are remembered and there are certain things that aren't, right? So as Idle Time adds, FDR is a central pillar in the boomer truth regime. yes, who knows exactly what AA means by boomer truth, but there is this narrative, right? This narrative of how the government came to the rescue and saved us. FDR's a hero. Socialists are heroes, all that kind of stuff, right? And we got to get past it somehow. Alessio says, even here in Italy, FDR is portrayed as a hero. Amazing.
What?
I know. Let's see.
I just had a mini stroke for a second. What?
I know. In Italy. It's crazy. Lawrence says, cut the NHS budget by 100%. Absolutely. That's going to be a hard sell, as we were discussing on Twitter, but somebody needs to start the campaign against the NHS.
And this is the danger of government programs, isn't it? NHS becomes a religion, essentially. It becomes their new god. Think about, I'm always reminded of this clip of this young black lady. She has 15 kids, and she's clapping her hands together, and she's saying, someone needs to be held accountable, someone needs to help me out, someone needs to pay for my children.
Wow.
It doesn't even go past their brain that maybe you shouldn't have had the kids. Maybe you should get a job and take personal responsibility.
Yeah,
but it just becomes a way of life that, yeah, of course the government's going to pay for this. What are you talking about? So it's
okay. Let's rapid fire through some more here. We're seeing similar in the UK. Most of the workforce sat at home on 80% pay from the government. Maven Politics says, all signs I see is that they'll try and inflate the debt away. Yeah. Let's see. Talking about, having libertarian policy is never going to happen. 2/3 in my country are under some government benefits or working for the government. Libertarian policies are not possible.
In Italy, I would say it's pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
In Europe, generally.
Someone else chimes in, Thunder Chunky, there's no way they'll let the markets recover in this day and age. It's not even remotely on the table. Charlemagne says, I'm hard for Harding. I wonder if anyone has ever said that in the history. This may be the first time anyone has ever uttered those words. Okay, let's see.
I was just reminded about from that comment on actually became the first woman in politics. So she was a force to her own right as well. So he
Who are you talking about?
Lyons, his wife.
Oh, no kidding. What was her name?
Yeah. I think it was Jess or something. I forget. But she was a important political figure in her own right. So he was attracted to strong women.
Okay, Thunder Chunky. They'll never relinquish power over the market. Not in a million years. It'll get worse. They'll sue for more control, more power. They'll never deregulate. It'll take a revolution. I hope it can be, and then Thunder Chunky says, complete collapse. I hope we can do better than that. Let's see. Lumberg says, World War II war machine relied on private companies to innovate and reach production goals. Yeah, there's probably a story, well, knowing how much focus there is on World War II, it's probably been told somewhere. We just need to find it, of, what happened between government and private industry during World War II,
Yeah, so the private industry had to have been there for the government to use. I think that's what we have to remember in all this.
I thought of this. I was hesitant to say it. Hopefully, Maven Politic knows more than me. But I thought of this when you brought this up. Britain didn't go full command economy during the Napoleonic Wars. That was not small wars that we won. I think that's correct to some degree, though I have evidence that there was a little bit of inflation, inflationary behavior.
They also introduced during that time, they said it was a temporary measure, but they introduced a income tax during the Napoleonic Wars.
Yes, there was some stuff that was not very good at that time, that's for sure. Idle Time says the public ties Keynesian policies to their moral opposition to fascism and communism and support of the USA. The American mythos was shifted to FDR's vision. I think I understand what's being said here, that, you know,
Oh,
we,
yes, I
we,
see.
we won against the Nazis and the commies. And by we, it's, Keynesians, basically. They were the ones in charge during World War II and after. So yeah, that might be right. Let's see. Lumberg says, I put 25% of my liquidity into gold coins. That's a heavy position to have in gold. The rest I overpaid my mortgage. In other words, trying to get that debt down. Yeah. Uranium looks like a good investment at the moment. Mines have been shut due to COVID. That's interesting. Uranium's a real good, right? That's going to continue to have value.
Can't be used.
Say it one more time.
Yeah, that can't be used as money, but it's a real good nonetheless.
Right.
A little bit toxic.
Yeah, well, right. Let's see. Okay, trying to get to the end here. Back on the how to invest. Buy stock of companies that have a lot of tangible assets, energy grids, water companies, land holdings, etc. As opposed to, like you said, like the Silicon Valley companies that don't really have any assets. They just have a lot of hopes and dreams and losing money every year. That may not be where you want to put your money right now.
Yeah. So the one I'd really avoid, like, do not invest in, is my advice, is Apple. I
Really?
see a lot of problems coming for Apple in the future, and I wouldn't be surprised if they get a government bailout.
Interesting. We'll have to see.
Just where all their factories are positioned, their finances, that I'm not touching them. Not even going near it.
Charlemagne says Mad Mercenary has the same initials as Mencius Moldbug. There you go.
Oh, bless.
Bless, yeah. Oh, and then Lauren says, and Mad Max. So that's probably not a coincidence, the Mad Max.
I probably drink more.
Let's see. Put your gold on your gun. Government can try and take it, plus you get to look cool. Okay.
Apart from the fact you scratch it the fuck up. Oh, scratch it up. Sorry about the language again.
Let's see. I'm going to try to wrap up. Any comments? Okay, this is interesting. Okay, Freedom's Forge, a book by Arthur L. Herman, talks about private firms helping the government to smash the Nazis. Freedom's Forge. That actually sounds vaguely familiar. Interesting. Good pointer there. Thank you.
I'm going to see if it's available. Freedom's Forge.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'm going to wrap it up here. We'll see what comes next. I think our topic selection, we've had fodder because there's just so much going on right now to talk about from an economic point of view. And I think a lot of concern, right? People losing jobs and just not knowing what the future holds. Are we going to just go back to normal in a few months? Or is this the beginning of something really that just goes on and on? Not necessarily everybody staying in their home for years, but an economic depression that goes on for years. That certainly seems at least a possibility. I wouldn't bet against it at this point. I hope not, of course, but I wouldn't bet against it. So yeah, I think that's what we need to be watching as we continue to have the show, is looking for where is this going in terms of recovery economically. And then I love what was brought up about New Zealand, the war on cash there. That's something I would like us to keep our eye on as we can, any news you guys get, send it to me or Mad Merc, war on cash type of stuff, because that could be another interesting outcome, a bad outcome of this crisis, which is that things, as we keep saying, they end up doing things they wanted to do anyway, right? And we know they have already been doing the war on cash low key for years. Do they accelerate that in the crisis and then try to leave as much of that in place as possible when the crisis is over? That will be interesting to see. So we'll be keeping our eye on that ball as well. Okay, so I think we're done for today, right, Mad Merc?
All good on my end. Have a good one, everyone.
Hey, thanks, everybody. A lot of substantive comments and pointers to literature. Great stuff. Thanks. Bye.